Today, we're going on an incredible trip. We're going to follow the journey of water, all the way from a tiny mountain spring, watching as it carves through the land as a river, pauses in these huge lakes, and finally meets the open ocean. So let's dive in.
You know, every river, just like this beautiful one you see here, has a life story. It's a story that's written in water, and it's full of energy, constant change, and just immense power. We're going to follow that story right from the very beginning all the way to its grand finale. Okay, so our journey starts way up high in the mountains. You can almost think of a river's course like a life story. It has this really energetic, chaotic youth, a winding, more relaxed middle age, and then a broad, slow-moving old age as it gets closer and closer to the sea. This diagram here is basically the roadmap for a river's entire life. Up high in the mountains, that's its upper course. The slope is super steep. This gives the water a ton of energy to cut straight down, carving out that classic, sharp V-shaped valley. But as it flows downhill, the slope flattens out, so the river's energy starts spreading out sideways, widening the valley into more of a U-shape, and then, eventually, that massive flat plain you see right before it hits the ocean. And you know, rivers also have these really distinct personalities, or what geologists like to call planforms. Some are pretty straight, just going from point A to point B. Others are way more relaxed, curving and bending in these beautiful loops we call meanders. And then you get these guys, braided rivers. They're constantly spreading up and rejoining, creating this incredibly complex and beautiful web of channels. But a river's path doesn't always change slowly, bit by bit. Sometimes the change is incredibly sudden and, honestly, pretty violent. It's a process called avulsion. This is where a river, usually during a huge flood, just completely abandons its old channel and carves a brand new one. It's kind of like nature's most extreme renovation project. And if you want to see the sheer power of avulsion, just look at the Kashi River. Back in 2008, it just abruptly jumped its banks and shifted its entire course by more than 60 kilometers. Can you imagine? That event impacted millions of people. It's just a powerful reminder that these rivers are living, dynamic systems that we can never, ever fully control.
Okay, now our journey takes us to a place where the water kind of pauses. Rivers often flow into lakes, these huge, still reservoirs that hold so much of the Earth's history deep down in their waters.
So a lot of the world's biggest and deepest lakes were actually born from some pretty incredible geological violence. Tectonic lakes, like Lake Baikal in Russia, form when the Earth's crust literally pulls apart or shifts along fault lines. This creates these enormous depressions that, over time, just fill up with water. Other lakes have an equally fiery origin story. When a massive volcano erupts and then collapses in on itself, it can leave behind this giant bowl called a caldera. Over thousands of years, rain and snowmelt fill it up, creating these absolutely stunning, crystal clear, and incredibly deep volcanic lakes, just like Crater Lake in Oregon.
But sometimes, a lake isn't born from fire or earthquakes. Sometimes, it's just a memory of a river's past. As a river snakes across a floodplain, it's always looking for a shortcut. When it finds one, it cuts off one of its own wide bends. And that abandoned loop? It becomes this beautiful, U-shaped oxbow lake, literally the ghost of the river's former path.
Now, a lake is way more than just a static pool of water. It's dynamic. It actually breathes with the seasons. Twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall, the entire body of water mixes in a process called turnover. As the temperature of the surface water changes, it gets denser and sinks, which pushes that nutrient-rich water from the bottom all the way up to the surface. This whole circulation is absolutely vital for spreading oxygen around and supporting all the life in the lake.
So how do we actually measure how healthy a lake is? Well, scientists use a system that's based on nutrient levels, or its trophic state. On one end, you have oligotrophic lakes. They're low in nutrients, which gives them that super clear water that fish like trout just love. On the other end of the spectrum are eutrophic lakes. They're packed with nutrients, which leads to murky water, lots of algae, and fish like perch that do well in those conditions. Maintaining that balance is so important because human pollution can easily push a lake into an unhealthy eutrophic state.
All right, our river has come a long way from the mountains and taken a rest in a lake. Now it's finally reaching its ultimate destination, the estuary. This is that dynamic, incredible zone where fresh water finally gets to mix with the salt water of the sea. So, what is an estuary? Simply put, it's where the river meets the sea. This creates a really unique mix of fresh and salt water that we call brackish water.
And these zones are unbelievably important. They're some of the most biologically productive ecosystems on the entire planet, acting as these critical nurseries for tons and tons of marine species.
And of course, not all estuaries are created equal. They can form as fjords, which are these super deep valleys carved out by ancient glaciers. They can be bar-built, where sandbars create a kind of protective lagoon. Tectonic estuaries, as we've seen, are created by shifts in the Earth's crust. And coastal plain estuaries are basically drowned river valleys that were flooded by rising sea levels after the last ice age.
San Francisco Bay is a perfect example of a tectonic estuary. Right here, the very same fault lines that cause earthquakes created this low-lying basin that allowed the Pacific Ocean to rush inland and meet the rivers flowing down from the mountains. It's a massive, incredible system born from the shifting of the Earth itself.
So we've followed water's natural course from start to finish. But that story isn't quite complete. The final part of this journey, well, it's about us. It's about our fingerprint and how human activity has just fundamentally reshaped these amazing systems.
I mean, think about it. From agriculture and mining to building massive dams and entire cities, everything we do has huge consequences. We've completely altered river flows, we've changed how sediment moves, and we've introduced all kinds of pollutants, really changing the fundamental character of these natural places.
This image right here tells such a powerful story. On the left, you see a natural winding river. It's a complex, beautiful system just teeming with life. And on the right, that's the same river after it's been channelized. It's been straightened out and contained, all for our convenience. Yeah, it might be efficient for us, but it's basically an ecological desert compared to what it once was.
Mining is another activity with a huge impact. When certain minerals in the rock get exposed to air and water, they can create something called acid mine drainage. This stuff is highly acidic and often loaded with toxic heavy metals. It poisons waterways for miles, turning them these really strange, unnatural colors you see here. It's just toxic.
And perhaps no story is more tragic than the story of the Aral Sea. I mean, just look at this. This was once the fourth largest lake on the entire planet. But starting in the 1960s, the rivers that fed it were diverted for enormous agriculture projects. And today, well, today the sea is pretty much vanished, leaving behind a ghost lake in the middle of a man-made desert.
So, from the highest mountain peaks to the floor of the ocean, water carved the world that we know. And in a very short amount of time, we have fundamentally altered that grand journey to suit our own needs. So the question we're all left with is this: can we find a better way? Can we manage our impact and allow these vital systems to finally heal? What will our chapter in their story look like?